And when it says Bria is Yesh Me'ayin, Bria is something from nothing. Oh man. People ask me, how much does nothing weigh? You know, something from nothing. No, it doesn't mean nothing is where it comes from. It means it doesn't come from anywhere. It's not like making a table in an empty space. Those words apply to that, but that's not what's crucial. What's crucial is, can you see a continuity between what you know of the Creator in the creation? And since, whatever the words ultimately mean, goodness is associated with the Creator, if there is something that's good that's created, so then, in this context, the language would not be Bria, Bore, because then it wouldn't be coming from nowhere, just popping into existence. But evil? Choshech and evil, right? That's something else. It's very difficult to trace existence of evil to the Creator. So that's much more something that comes from nowhere than something which is continuous with what we know about the Creator. So light, which is good, in the first 5 verses of the Torah, the light is associated with the good, and the darkness is associated with evil. So the first one is forming, not creating out of nothing. And Osa Sholem, Osa is also not out of nothing. And Vori is a kol. Ra, creating the evil and darkness don't flow in a natural progression from what we know about the Creator. That's why the word will is used. Will is used for things which aren't necessitated by the agent. They come from a new impulse, a new source. Okay, it's a complicated story.
No, thank you.
Yeah, but you can have the beginning. Yeah.
I mean, in the same sense. So we do say that there's like some previous Yetzirah to the Bria, like there's certain flow of formation of existence which precedes Bria.
If Bria is Yesh Me'ayin, there can't be anything before it from which it flows. That's the idea of Bria. Rambam, Rabbi, and others say Bria means Yesh Me'ayin. The question is, which Yesh and which Ayin? You think it's matter and energy from something which wasn't matter and energy. Before that, there was nothing. That's one way, Yesh Me'ayin. The other Yesh Me'ayin is you have a source that's all pink, and something green comes out of it. How does that happen if it's all pink? It's all pink. So vis-a-vis the pink, green would be Yesh Me'ayin. It's not flow, it's not a flow of pink. Pink doesn't express itself in green.
So what's Yesh Me'ayin?
Huh?
What's Yesh Me'ayin?
Yesh means existence, and Ayin means nothing. Ayin with an aleph. Okay, I see that this is not something which is exciting to most people. I think there's something here that needs to be said and be recorded so people will see it. Happy is the person whom God, you could say, chastises. We'll have to describe what that means, and teaches him from his Torah. Happy, successful, different translations of Ashrei. Question is, what is there in chastisement from the Creator which would be described as being happiness or success? And before we get to that specific question, I want to give a little background. Some schools of psychology talk about something called framing. I want to give a sketch of the idea and point out 2 important features of framing. The ultimate idea of framing is that when you have an experience, the experience is the result of 2 factors interacting. One is the objective events that are occurring in the world, and the other is roughly the attitude, ideas, values, understanding that you bring to those events. Both play a role in determining what the experience will be for you. Everyone knows that you can have a single event, and people can undergo the identical physical event and have two very different experiences. In political terms, you could have two countries that are severely beaten in war and suffer destruction, and one country builds a vast defensive military operation to protect against this happening again, and the other country becomes pacifist. The same objective event took place, but the effect on the character, the culture, is opposite. The difference is in what they brought to the event. The most common example of framing is the difference between two people who are looking at a glass of water, and one says that it's half full and one says it's half empty. Now, if one says it's half full and one says it's half empty, what is the truth?
Both.
Yes, the truth is that it's both. Because if it's half full, it's automatically half empty, and vice versa. So then, when one says that it's half full, he's right. When one says that it's half empty, he's right. They're both right. So then the question becomes, since they're both right, how do you decide which one to adopt as your perspective? Since they're equally factually right, that's not how you're going to choose. So then the psychologist's suggestion is adopt the one that will do the most for your life. If adopting your perspective that it's half full makes you hopeful and creative and engaged and energetic and enables you to make something out of what you have, whereas the perspective that is half empty makes you depressed and pessimistic and hopeless and puts you into despair, then adopt the frame that says that it's half full. Notice, I want to stress this because some people miss it, and in some presentations of psychology they omit it. Notice that they're both true. No one is suggesting that you adopt a fantasy to interpret what's going on in your life, which isn't true. Maybe we'll talk about why that's not an appropriate suggestion, why that's really a destructive suggestion. But that's not the issue. The issue is that what's in front of you bears many possible frames. And the suggestion of psychology is to use a frame, or maybe more than one, which create within you the experience that is best for your life. Now, that sounds like eminently good advice. What it slurs over is two terrific problems. Number one, people aren't born with a whole dictionary of 1,000 pages of frames. It isn't as if they're given to you by God. The best frame, or a good frame for the event that you are experiencing, may be unknown to you. So somebody says, well, pick a positive frame, and the person says, I don't know any. That's a relatively simple problem. Talk to people. Get advice. People give you opportunities and alternatives that you didn't think of. Worse than that, the mere fact that I know this frame would give me a positive experience and I'll be able to build on it doesn't mean I can snap my fingers and adopt it. Adopting a frame is a very difficult process. Not clear what general instructions can be given to do it. Not clear how to train people to do it. Probably varies from person to person and problem to problem, age to age. So knowing that frames play a very important role doesn't by itself yet give you a method for improving your life, solving your problems, improving your experience. This idea owes some of its origin to the philosopher Kant, who stressed that what you bring to an experience controls, to some extent, the quality of the experience that you have. He took it to an extreme, that all you end up with is the inner experience and nothing else. We don't have to go that far. But looking at the effect gives you this challenge to think of the frame. There are many examples in everyday life where you can see this at work. One is a certain type of optical illusion. I don't know if you've looked at the skeletal cube, where all you have is the edges of the cube. And if you look at it, you can see it flip back and forth. Which face appears closest to you and which face appears farther from you can reverse, go back and forth. Or you have the double portrait and vase picture where you have two portraits facing one another, and you can see the two portraits with space in between. Or the space in between looks like a vase, and the two portraits are just backgrounds surrounding the vase. Now, the point of these particular illusions is that you're looking at it, and the whole time you're getting the same light waves. The whole time you're getting the same retinal image. And yet, the experience changes. The experience of which frame is in front, or the experience of whether it's a vase or a double image, thank you very much. The experience changes even though the retinal image and the visual stimulation doesn't change. So if the experience changes and the image isn't changing, what's changing? What's changing is what you bring to the retinal image to interpret it. So again, the inner contribution is something which is partially formative of the experience that you have. Now, as an example of false frames, take, for example, conspiracy theories. A conspiracy theorist makes sure to put in features into his frame that fit all the details. It's a well-known problem in philosophy of science that whatever data you have, there's really an unending number of ways to cook up some kind of theory which describes it, and they all fit all the details. It's just some are obviously unsupported, obviously ridiculous, obviously out of court, and why that is a big problem. But it illustrates the same idea, that you have a certain amount of data and it doesn't determine which theory you should use to interpret, explain, and predict more data. It's called the underdetermination of theory by data. So we know that experience is made up this way. Now, just to illustrate some of the serious differences that can arise from using a frame which is a wrong frame, even though it fits the data. I heard an interview with a young, very successful entrepreneur, and the interviewer asked her, is it permissible to make mistakes? And she said, of course, everybody makes mistakes. You're permitted to make a mistake once. If you don't learn from the mistake, then you're in trouble. I know people who, if they make a mistake, say, well, then this wasn't meant for me. I'm obviously not talented. I'm obviously not successful. I'll go do something else. That's a terrible frame, especially if you realize that everyone is going to make mistakes. That means, according to your frame, everybody should give up everything. That's clearly not an appropriate conclusion. We have a saying in the Talmud, Ein adam omer al divrei Torah elam kei nichshal behem. A person comes to understand and master Torah only when he stumbles over it. I don't think it means case by case, but stumbling is part of the process of mastery. Someone who can't tolerate making mistakes is simply writing himself out of a life of Torah and a life of physics and a life of translation and whatever it is. Any significant challenge means you're going to make mistakes. So the right frame is mistakes are natural, maybe they're inevitable, and they can be used to your advantage. And find a way to use them for your advantage. Right? Both frames will fit the fact that you make mistakes, but one is productive frame and the other is a destructive frame. Now, when you come to the idea of happy or successful is a person whom God chastises and teaches him from his Torah, the question has to be, what kind of frame shall we put on chastising? What's the background? What's the context in which God chastises us? Here is a difference between frames which you could concoct, which fit the idea of a creator, versus frames that are supported by the Jewish tradition. So here they're not going to be equally true. And here the ones that we're going to reject, we're going to reject because they aren't true. And that's, how shall I say, that's a much stronger reason for rejecting it. Then there's no reason to put up with the negative consequences of the bad frame, no matter what. And here's a frame which is very common. I wouldn't say no Jewish sources support it. I would say far fewer than people imagine, and there are clearly sources which deny it. Can a person be suffering through no fault of his own? Can a person be suffering through no fault of his own? The Kabbalistic sources say yes. So, if your frame is, I'm suffering because I'm guilty, then whenever you're suffering, you feel guilty. If you feel guilty, then you feel inadequate. You feel rejected by God. You feel you're being punished. And the suffering is long-term and continuous. It can drive a person to despair. Ramchal describes, this is in part 2 of The Way of God, Balance Sato, chapters 2 and 3, describes one reason for everything that, no, one reason affecting everything that happens to people. There are other reasons affecting them also. But one reason affecting them is this. A person is put into the world to conquer a certain challenge. And it's going to be consistent throughout his life that he's going to have to work on that challenge. No matter what else changes in his life, that's going to be a consistent challenge. And that challenge may involve suffering. It may be poverty, it may be sickness, it may be social rejection, it also might be wealth, it also might be health, it also might be strength. There are various challenges in life. But the challenge may involve suffering. He was born to that challenge. Nothing he has done is being punished by that suffering. And nothing he does will alleviate that suffering, because that's what he was born to affect. It's one possible way of understanding the Gemara in Brachos about if a person sees suffering coming upon himself, he should check his actions. He checked his actions, didn't find anything, he should attribute it to failure of Torah study. If it isn't, if it didn't find it, and of course, if you attribute it and didn't find it, it needs a whole explanation, which I have in my book, but I'm not going to go into that now. If you didn't find it, then attribute it to sufferings of love, suffering that God brings on a person out of love. The other commentators are split. Rashi says, to increase your reward in the world to come. Definitely not a punishment for anything you've done. I think that what Tzadok was saying would fit as an example of Rashi, not that necessarily Rashi had this in mind, but if you are chosen, if your life's challenge is to conquer the challenge of poverty or of sickness, then surely God put you there and He created you out of love and He gave you this as your contribution to the perfection of the entire creation. And by doing that, you of course will earn a tremendous reward in the world to come. So I don't say Rashi made this in detail, but it certainly fits Rashi's words. There, when the person's suffering comes on him, the frame of I'm guilty and I'm being punished and God is rejecting me is a terrible mistake. It's a terrible mistake. Now, that means that in ignorance, a person can say, well, of course the Kabbalists, Lissato, agree that there is such a thing as punishment. So when the suffering is approaching me, I'm experiencing suffering, then it might be punishment. That's true. It might be punishment. Then the question will be, what frame should I put on that? And that's what we're talking about now, because Yisurim usually are a response to failure. Yisurim are a response to failure. Gives man Yisurim. To chastise someone is usually a response to failure. Chastise means to criticize and punish. So here, the frame is absolutely crucial. Does punishment mean rejection? Does punishment mean that I'm a failure? Does punishment mean that I have no hope? Does punishment mean that I should just resign myself to living with punishment? The answer is no. The answer is that the frame that is appropriate for punishment coming from God, chastisement coming from God, has two elements in it. One is that what you do matters. What you do counts. What you're doing is important. If you were trivial, if what you did didn't matter to anything important, there'd be no point in God investing chastisement in you. God doesn't chastise lions that kill gazelles. God doesn't chastise the flood that swamps the city. God won't chastise someone whose evil is so thorough that He won't hear it. God doesn't waste His breath, so to speak. Odessa writes about this in his essay on trust and endeavor. There's 5 categories of people, different ways in which God tries to reach people. And he says the 4th category is where God, so to speak, goes to the last possibility of reaching a person. And if He doesn't hear the call, the 5th category, he says, that the person becomes indistinguishable from a cow. A cow can have a very pleasant life. Very pleasant, healthy, happy, die of old age. He's just become insignificant, irrelevant. That's a horrible outcome. That's a horrible end. Chastisement means that you matter. And that's why it's worth trying to correct you. And the second thing that God's chastisement implies is that you can do better. Also, it would make no sense to chastise a person, punish him, if he can't do any better, if he's doing everything that he can the chastising won't help him in any way. Won't help him in any way, and won't help anybody else in any way. The chastisement won't be able to produce any change in his behavior. So when a person receives chastisement from Hashem, he should take it as a double vote of confidence. What I'm doing is important, and I can do better. And that should be an encouragement, an inspiration to make a greater effort to do better. There's a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which also, with this in mind, I heard this from Avraham Jacobowitz, who used to be in Detroit. I did programs with him, great person. He said, the Mishnah says, if you want to avoid sin, know what's above you. A seeing eye, a listening ear, and all your actions are written in a book. And he says, people have complained to him, Rabbi, isn't that a kind of primitive conception? Watch out! Watch out! You're being observed. Everything's recorded. They're going to get you. You know, anything you do wrong, you're going to catch it. He said, no, that's not the meaning of the Mishnah at all. Imagine the Mishnah had written, no eye watches you. No ears listening to you. Your actions are lost to entropy. They drift away in the dust. How would you feel? You would feel that I'm meaningless, that I'm valueless. Doesn't matter whether I live or die. That's right. That's what the Mishnah would mean if it said the opposite. So saying it this way means you're not meaningless. You're not valueless. You're very important. That's why God is paying attention and writing everything down. Because what you're doing is very important. That's also a vote of confidence. Not meant to be crushingly punitive. Now, one thing that a person has to teach himself so that he can employ the right frames is that ultimately everything is coming from good. Everything is coming from good and everything is leading to good. So as we have said many times, I'm not going to repeat the whole argument tonight, that we don't say that everything is good, but we say that everything leads to good. And the reason for that is that everything is coming from good, though I haven't stressed that in the past, but both are true. Nochon ish gamzu said gamzu litova. This too is for good. Rabbi Kiva, his disciple, said, everything God does is for good. If everything that God does is for good, when the chastisement comes, you have to ask, what good is it meant for? Like when pleasant things happen, like when happy things happen, you have to ask, what is it meant for? Always you have to ask, what is it meant for? And the answers may not be simple. The answers may be subtle. There was an example in last week's Parsha, which I think I didn't have clear until this last, I was reading the Parsha, preparing for Shabbos. There's war against Midian. And the leaders report to Moses that we have checked the membership of the army, and it turns out that not a single soldier died. That's clearly a miracle. And then the verse goes on to say, therefore, we have taken from the spoils all of the golden jewelry, and we are offering it as a sacrifice to Hashem to atone for our souls before Hashem. Wow. I don't know. If I had experienced a miracle like that, I would say, God's on my side. Look at that. No one died. We must be good. We must be in a good position. We should say thank you and celebrate. What? I should think about sin and failure and think about kapara and atonement? Yeah. Yeah, right. Of course you should celebrate, and of course you should express your gratitude, but also think about where you still might have missed. And the commentators talk about various things where they could have missed, and they offered this sacrifice to give a kapara, to give some kind of atonement for things they had done wrong. So here you could see that the context of rejoicing and feeling close and favored by God is also an opportunity for correcting mistakes that have been made. So that means that the frame is complex. The frame isn't simple. Similarly, you know that a chatas is a sacrifice usually for sin. There are two cases which the Gemara in the Dovid discusses. A woman who gives birth her husband has to bring a chatas for her, and provide her with a chatas. And a nazir, even one who doesn't become tamei, has to bring a chatas. And so the Gemara says, well, what did they do wrong? So the Gemara says, well, the pain of childbirth caused the woman to say, I'm not going to have any more children. And the nazir who takes a vow not to drink wine has caused himself deprivation, and that deprivation is a kind of sin, so that's what he's done wrong. So the Ran on the spot says, listen, let's be realistic. You do not bring a korban chatas for saying that you're going to not have more children. Furthermore, says the Ran, some women know they didn't say it. And don't tell me they said it psychologically, subconsciously. Torah knows better than you what's in your mind. Sorry. The Ran doesn't say that. So it's not a chatas for those averos, those transgressions. Chatas is for very serious transgressions. Same with the nazir. Someone who doesn't drink for wine, or if he makes a vow not to drink wine, has not performed a sin for which the chatas should be done. So there are two ways to look at it. I heard from Rabbi Soloveitchik in Boston, that these are opportunities for cleansing. Chatas is the strongest cleansing agent that we have in terms of sacrifices. Because Baruch Hu said, these people have been through experiences and they deserve this as an opportunity for cleansing. So then, like we said before, like we said in terms of last week's parsha, you'd have to look around and see, well, what is it that needs cleansing? So the Gemara is giving you suggestions as to what needs cleansing, which are minor things, but you'll be given an opportunity to cleanse even for those minor things, or other minor things. Think of the greatness of succeeding at being a nazir. Think of the wonderful gift of having a new child, and think of that as an opportunity for great cleansing. So instead of thinking, this is a very great gift and I'm going to be thankful, or a very great accomplishment, a nazir is compared in one of its contexts to prophets, and to think of what a great thing it is, think of it as an opportunity for cleansing. And think of it as part of my overall project in life to be a success, which requires cleansing from failure. Don't let the existence of failure escape your mind when you're celebrating the success. That's a very subtle frame. And it means you have to be running on two tracks. Running on two tracks is not easy, psychologically, especially when the one track is very happy, very inspiring, very much full of rejoicing. They say, but don't forget. Like I heard from my Rebbe Zatzal, the Boston Rebbe, when you're in Purim, in the midst of the festivities, he said to me, don't think I've lost track of the modern day Haman who succeeded. It means in the middle of Purim, he was thinking about the Holocaust. So one thing about the Jewish frame is that it's got a wide-angle lens. It's not tunnel vision. It's a wide-angle lens, and this idea of correcting is something which is always present. So now, if you think of, if the suffering is chastisement, as I said at the beginning, not always is a chastisement, but if it is, then you can think of it as a vote of confidence in your significance of what you're doing and a vote of confidence in your still untapped ability to do better, and use those as positive reasons to try to improve. Instead of, no, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. In addition to clapping al chet, feeling guilty, which is something which can depress you and lead you to despair, and despair is the big enemy. Both in Hasidic thought and in much Musar thought, despair is the biggest enemy. If you think of it as a vote of confidence, then you have a psychological up to carry you forward with. Kol neshama tehal al, which literally means all souls should praise God. And the Gemara says, I'll call neshima v'neshima on every breath. Every breath. So, again, what's the frame? Well, he's given me something. He gave me money, he gave me intelligence, he gave me a context. He gives me life. Life, breath by breath. No, he's giving it to me. I should be grateful. That's true, you should be grateful. But there's more to it than that. He's not giving out life blind. He hasn't got a blindfold on and handing out goodies to whoever will get it. He gave you breath. That means he's investing in you. It means he thinks you have a present and a future. Well, if he's investing in me, then I must have a present and a future. He doesn't make mistakes. If he's investing in me, then there's more potential there. There's something else that I can do. So read from his gesture what his attitude is towards what you're doing. So if the investment is chastisement, look at it as an investment. He's investing in me. And then you can be happy with it. You can feel close to Kadosh Baruch Hu. You know, there are children who have difficulties, whether it's psychological difficulties, emotional difficulties, or sometimes physical difficulties, and the question of how to treat them. There is a terrible, terrible psychological strategy which says the worst thing is for them to experience failure. Make sure that they never fail. If the job is too hard, make it easier. If they do fail, overlook it. Pretend you didn't see it. Because failure crushes them and teaches them how bad they are, and they know they're inadequate, and they're crushed by it. Children aren't that stupid. They know that you have no standards for them. What conclusion do they draw from that? Well, if they have no standards for me, it means I'm totally incompetent. I'm totally incompetent. That's also a terrible message to send, isn't it? You can't be counted on for anything. You can't be trusted for anything. You imagine the child tries to do something that's difficult in coordination, and he's failed at it in the past, and the parent says, "Oh, don't you do that, I'll do it." Well, you saved him from failure, all right. You also saved him from success, and you saved him from being treated as competent and responsible for which you can put standards. So when standards are applied and consequences are applied, that is a vote of confidence. And that vote of confidence should be taken that way. It should be framed that way. Because Baruch Hu, in that respect, is an ultimate parent. It's not just worthless imagery to call God a father. There are ways in which he relates to us as a father. The father cares about the child, wants the best for the child, and invests in the child. So when there's an event in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, puts us through something, he's really reaching out to us. He's reaching out to us in a way which, if we understand that he's reaching out, and we understand the good purpose that it's supposed to serve, we can react to it positively rather than negatively. There is a negative element. Again, it's like the half full glass and a half empty glass. If a person receives chastisement, again, leaving out now the Ramchal's alternative, if it really is for the sake of chastisement, it really is for the sake of failure, then there is failure there. That's the half empty. But chastising for the failure is a vote of confidence. That's the half full. And maybe, just maybe, you can get to the point where you can adopt both positively. You can adopt both positively. Since the half full is there as part of your frame, then recognizing the half empty doesn't drive you to despair. It doesn't drive you to give up. And then you have, like I was saying before, a frame with two sides to it, a more complex frame. Let me illustrate, this with a famous example. It's not my example. Take someone who, God forbid, is quadriplegic. He's been in an accident. He lost the use of his hands and legs, arms and legs. There are people who die of despair. They're focused on, look at all the things I can't do, things that I love, things that I do with my family, my friends, things that inspire me, mountain climbing, ice skating. Life isn't worth it. That's the half empty, and it drives them to despair, sometimes to death. Now, I don't know if history has passed postcards by. Probably now it's emails or Facebook pages or some other nonsense. But there was, once upon a time, a piece of cardboard with a picture on one side and space for a message on the other side. You bought them for money and you sent them in the post, and the person receives this piece of postcard with a picture on one side and a message on the other side. What picture is on the other side? So it depends. There were various different kinds. And some of them, look in the corner, it says, painted by a quadriplegic with his toes. He could move his toes. So he learned how to hold a paintbrush in his toes, and he painted the picture with his toes. What's going on in the mind of that person? He's not looking at no more dancing and no more mountain climbing and no more bicycling and no more football. Not looking at that one. He's looking at, what do I have left? He's looking at what do I have left and what can I do with what I have left. And if he's, or shall I say, a psychologically whole person, he had that attitude from the beginning when he was using all his limbs. His attitude was, what do I have and what can I do with it? And the fact that at one time what he has is a lot, and the fact that at another time what he has is a little, doesn't have to change his attitude of, what do I have and what can I do with it? That frame is available to him. Another example that I know of is a guy who learned to program the computer with his toes, and he became a weather forecaster. He looked at the satellite images, learned how to interpret them, and he forecasted the weather. Okay, so there's an idea of enabling a person to turn towards the positive and thereby avoid the devastating effects of the negative. I'm now talking about, in our context, something a little more subtle. When you turn towards the positive, you can accept the negative also and look at that as your field of endeavor. You don't switch your focus to a different field of endeavor where you're still competent. The positive part of the frame is, Kadosh Baruch Hu is chastising me because what I do is important and because he thinks I can do better. And I take that encouragement, the fact that he is investing in me, as the encouragement and the inspiration to look back at the negative side and deal with it because he's encouraging me to deal with it. That way you have not only one half that's true and it's just as true as the other half, and therefore it's justified to pick this one over the other one, you have a much richer picture. Because you start your orientation with the positive half, you embrace both halves. And now you have the total reality of the picture, and you're responding to that. That, I think, would be the most successful framing project that you could have, where you adopt both sides of the frames and use them both together. I learned about this many years ago from Zelig Pliskin's first book, Rabbi Zelig Pliskin, Gateway to Happiness. where he explained this idea of framing. He pointed out that Torah gives you positive frames with which to frame what you're doing in a productive way. And I thought, to me, it was a new idea. I hadn't heard of framing in psychology. I hadn't studied psychology. And only later did I begin to realize, trying to put it into practice, that you have these two obstacles. And this now is something which, the last point that I want to make, you're not given an encyclopedia of frames. So when you're reading Torah sources, think of this concept. What frame did this provide for some aspect of life? Otherwise, the information could pass you right by. Like last week's Parsha, which I've read quite a few times, it didn't occur to me the juxtaposition of no one dying in the war to wanting to have a kapara. Only this year it struck me as a very interesting psychological condition where the happy, successful, divine favor should lead you to thinking about in what ways you could improve. So you read it for and then the other half is that the resources have to be there to enable you to use it. If the general attitude is everything is for the good, and you can figure out for what good it is, then you can use it for that good. That's only if you really trust that, if you really believe in that. Then you can have the psychological strength to use that idea and adopt the frame. Otherwise, the frame is there, and you say, sure, if I could adopt it, my life would be much better, but I can't do it. It's just, to me, it's not realistic, or I can't relate to it, I can't integrate it, and then the information is there, but it's not good enough. So then you have to say to yourself, what basic Jewish attitudes enable the adoption of positive frames, and to work on those. I think these are the basic Ikari Hamudah. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows everything that's happening. HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands everything. He can predict everything that will happen. So, and he has the good as the goal for everything that happens. So, for example, I don't know if you've met people like this. I've met people like this. People who talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu all day long. Talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu all day long, not just during davening. Where are my keys? Ribono Shel Olam, I've lost my keys again. Please, I know I asked yesterday and the day before, but please help me find my keys. And they look around for a while and say, oh, thank you so much for finding my keys. I lost my wallet. On Friday, I lost my wallet. There was at least 400 shekels in it, and my card for my pacemaker, which lets me go through without it, and the key to Rabbi Gaffen's office. I lost it. Checked everywhere, looked everywhere. I said, Ribono Shel Olam, I need help. If I find it, I'm putting 50 shekels in tzedakah. Fine. I first went to where I was and tried to find it, asked people, nothing. Well, fine. Friday night, Shabbos, mostly Shabbos, I think, I'll go over there. Maybe somebody found it. They put up a sign. This morning, I put on my jacket. There's a lump in my jacket. Guess what? A thread on my jacket got caught in a piece of metal in the purse, which pulled it out of my pocket. So when I took off my jacket, it was out of my pocket. I couldn't find it. This morning, I put it out. There it is. 50 shekels to the tzedakah right away. Thank you, Ribono Shel Olam. Right? Because I'm living with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So if I lost it, I ask for help. If I find it, I say thank you. If you do that, and you're not embarrassed to do that, and especially do it in front of your children, I've spoken about this, then you will come to experience the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in your life. He's with you. He's taking care of you. Then, when the frame requires using the idea of constant divine providence to frame the event, then the frame will be available to you, because psychologically it will be real to you. You make it psychologically real by doing this. So this is something which you can research more broadly, the kinds of things that the Kodesh Baruch Hu is long-term plans. This you can study. There are many stories of things happen. 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, you suddenly find out why it happened. And then you think, well, okay, the things that happen to me now are planned. They're not just accidental. I'll give you a story that happened here in Ohr Somayach. This is probably 15 years ago. One of the mentors told this story. It happened to him. He had a daughter who wanted to get married. Time was going by, and there weren't any shidduchim. He was going on a trip to Europe, and they told him, go to Prague and go to the Ramah's shul in Prague, and when you daven there, stand right behind his chair and ask for help. He did. 3 months later, she was engaged. And then after that, she got married. Wow. Baruch Hashem. A year after marriage, the husband told her, I have something to tell you, which I didn't tell you beforehand, about my lineage. I'm Ben Achaben from the Ramah. And male line going right back to the Ramah. The Ramah helped him. The Ramah helped him. But he didn't know it right away. Maybe that never would have come out. Maybe he never would have told. You hear a story like that, I say, well, wait a second, then, Kodesh Baruch Hu is investing in me. If this happened to me, it's because it's a stepstone to something good. It's a stepstone to something better. I might never find out why it is. Or I might find out 10 years or 20 years from now why it is. But if I can believe that it's a stepstone, then I can look at it positively. I won't feel rejected. I won't feel distanced. So these are the ideas of framing, and in particular when suffering comes your way. So then the question of framing. If you think about it, that Gemara in Brachos that I quoted before can be read as an exercise in framing. First things, check for some kind of transgression that you've done. You didn't find that, then put it down to a failure of Torah study. That's the I'm guilty frame. And then if it isn't that, then it's the sufferings of love, which Rashi takes the way he does. The Ramchal would be in his camp, even though the Rambam and the Ramban reject that way of taking it, but this is the way of taking it. It means it's an alternative frame. So you try out one frame, but you try it out to see if it's realistic. And if it isn't realistic, then you move to another frame. That's what I told you at the beginning. What's wrong with an unrealistic frame? Well, first of all, think about this. You couldn't impose a frame knowing it was unrealistic, could you? Could you put a frame on an event and have that color your experience knowing that it wasn't true?
I think so.
I think it's very hard to imagine. I know that I'm going to make a prejudicial remark now. Maybe it doesn't go on anymore, but 20, 30 years ago, certain feminist groups instituted goddess worship. Why? Well, in traditional religion, the gods are all male. That's not fair. That's not representative. You have to have goddess worship. Worship? You're creating worship of a thing for a political end? But is it real? Is it a real thing? Does it really exist? If it really existed, then you wouldn't need it for a political end. Everything could be egalitarian, you should do it. Because it's real. And really worship it. How can you worship something that you put in only for political purposes? Only if you're cynical about all religion altogether. None of it is true, and none of it is realistic. It's only a social form, and the social form should be egalitarian. Then I can understand it. That makes a lot of sense. That's not putting the frame on the event. But put a frame on the event and have it color the way you experience the event and respond to the event when you know that it isn't true. I think that's going to require a great trick of psychology that I'm not privy to understand. So then, if, for example, you suggest a frame to a person and you know it's not true, you're deceiving him. If he knew it wasn't true, he wouldn't want it. And I myself think, if I knew it wasn't true, I wouldn't want it, so I hope that it is true. I want it to be true, because I don't want ones that aren't true. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, gives two examples of meaning in his book. One is of a person in a death camp, and his brother was in another death camp 50 miles away, and this one believed that if he bears the suffering well, his brother will survive. That gave his life meaning. Another was a woman who was dying, and her last 2 days were made more comfortable by the dialogue that she had with the tree outside her window. Dialogue, not monologue. She's talking, the tree is answering. So he gives us examples of meaning, psychologically valuable meaning. I realized, and I've taught it in my shiurim for a long time, somebody told me that his mother actually met Viktor Frankl and asked him this question, but they aren't true. These meanings aren't true. The suffering of this brother will not help the other brother survive. And certainly the tree was not talking back to the woman. And he said, of course, I just mean, if you do that, your life will be a better life. That means, from the point of view of that kind of psychology, it makes no difference whether it's true or not. It's just a question of whether it's functional. Well, the job of a psychologist is to make your life better. So really, from his point of view, whether it's true or not, Ludwig Wittgenstein criticized the appeal to trauma as the source for psychological problems on the grounds that no empirical studies have been done whether the discovered traumas are real. Did they really happen? From the point of psychology, that's not really important. If this person can come to fixate and accept the idea that he has these problems because he's a victim, then he won't blame himself. He won't blame himself. He can galvanize his positive motivation to do something about it. His life will be much better off. What do I care whether he's victimized or not? I'm making him life as a better life. That's what I'm being paid to do as a psychologist. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about adopting an illusion or imposing upon another person an illusion. Talking about creating a frame which is realistic, which enables you to deal with the total reality. Part of this is because the idea of a trauma is only in the past, whereas the frames that I'm talking about are the reality in the present and the future also. So it's going to orient you badly to but there are other negative effects also. If you weren't really victimized and you treat yourself as a victim, that will spill over into other areas. Get used to thinking of yourself as a victim, and then you have the whole victim psychology that you have that's poisoning the Western world at the present time. So these things are not free. They have all sorts of consequences. Anyway, so that's why I emphasize the true side of it. I think this is really a very important source of experience the world in a Jewish way, the idea of trying to find the appropriate frame.